I made this table for $0. Come check it out. Okay, so I had a client that requested an end table, and the colors that she mentioned that she wanted, I noticed I had a bunch of strips in my shop just laying around not doing anything, and that's kind of where I got the idea to make a $0 table. Just gonna make sure I have enough to make a 16-inch table here. Make sure that before you start your actual glue up, you have some thin strips of wood, at least the width of your project, and some C-clamps. You're going to need to keep your project as flat as possible for the later steps. And then you can start to just apply the glue very evenly and all over the place. Make sure you're using your finger, super pro move right here, just like what I'm doing. That way you get all your equipment and tools super gluey. Obviously, I'm just kidding. Titebond makes these really good glue brushes that are really popular amongst woodworkers. In fact, I have a few, I just never use them. In a second here, you'll see the thin strips of wood and the C-clamps that I was talking about. Make sure you only just snug the C-clamps until your pipe clamps are fully tightened. Otherwise, you could prevent a really tight glue up. What I find useful is keeping a putty knife nearby. That way I can smear the glue as flat as possible to save me work later on. That's just what I do. You can also just choose to take it off as best you can. When it is dry, you're going to chip away at it. Get all that excess glue off with the same putty knife as best you can. And when we're done, we're going to move it into a sort of flattening container that I built for when I was making a bunch of cutting boards. It's pretty easy to make. Just make sure that the 4 pieces that make up the walls here are all ripped at the same time. It ensures that they're the same height because your board will have a mimicked surface of those walls. So it really has to be as flat as possible. Here I'm just using some shims to make sure that there is zero movement in that board. It really has to be as flat as possible here. Once you have zero movement, you're going to go ahead and you're going to tape the table, that is, to the unit to make sure that it doesn't move while you're going up and down with the flattening bit with the router. I'll be sure to include a DIY flattening jig setup in the description from somebody who makes a good one. That's the flattening bit there. They're about 90 bucks on Amazon. And then we're going to start going up and down against the surface of that table until every inch is hit. And as you can see, this is super dusty work. I always make sure that I'm wearing a proper mask and that my shop vac is nearby. I'm always trying to make sure here as well that I'm taking super shallow passes, like a 1/16 of an inch, and then that I'm going up and down really slow to get a really even pass. It's fairly obvious if you're not doing it right because the router is going to scream at you. Now that your eyesight is all screwed up from that horrible camera movement, I'm just kind of cleaning up the area with my shop vac, and then I'm going to go and untape the board, and I'm going to retape it on the second side. This time around, you should hardly have any movement in the board at all. It should be quite flat. If there's a little bit of movement, you can shim it. It's no problem, but again, you should have hardly, if at all, any movement in the board. Once that's good, just go ahead and tape it like you did with the first side. And then you're gonna run it with the flattening jig as you did with the first surface until every inch is hit. And once that's done, I'm gonna take it out of the container, and I have 2 flat surfaces that I'm pretty happy with. So I'm gonna move to the next step, which is to sand it. I'm going to use 60 grit sandpaper here, and my goal here is just to get rid of any burn marks and any marks left by the flattening bit. I want a nice smooth surface for when I use my radius jig with my router. Once you're done with that, we're going to find the center of the board. Wherever you want, wherever you have enough room to make a circle, and then you're just going to make a pin-sized hole in the center with a nail. Here we're going to make our radius jig. 1/4 inch plywood, 3.5 inches width, maybe 16 inches long is just fine. I'm going to remove the plate, and I'm going to use that plate to mark my 4 holes into that new jig. You'll see that here I'm just using it for demonstration. I've actually already done it. You can see how I'm going to line up the holes, mark them, and then you're going to drill them. I also made sure to countersink the holes, that way when I go and screw them back into the router, that the screw would be sitting below the surface of the plywood to make sure my router runs smoothly against the board. Once the screws are nice and tight, I'm gonna remove the cover to put my bit in. I'm using a straight bit here. It's what I had. I think what's recommended here is using a solid carbide upcut spiral router bit, but I found that the straight bit worked just fine. Once that's tight, you're gonna put it back into the cover, and with the bit not touching the plywood, you're gonna turn the unit on and you're gonna slowly push it forward until it's until you create a hole. Once that's done, you're gonna see me with a ruler marking the edge of the bit to, I think I used 8 inches. That makes sense because my table was 16 inches across. So I'm gonna go half of that. I'm gonna make sure it's 1 3/4 inch, so dead center of this jig. And I'm going to mark it with a hole. And I wanted to be sure that everything was gonna work fine, so I kind of tested it on my work table just to make sure everything was good. And voila. So here's me actually using the jig. I made sure to just kind of take my time, take super shallow passes. That way not to get any tear out. Make sure that the surface of the router is touching firmly against the base of the table at all times to ensure a super straight cut. I'm gonna now apply a 1/4 inch round over on both sides of the table. You'll notice I'm going counterclockwise. So for the Makita router, counterclockwise on the exterior. And if you're doing interior, then you're gonna go clockwise. So just something to note. So let's say you were doing a juice groove on a cutting board, you would be going clockwise. On the exterior of that same cutting board, you're gonna go counterclockwise. I'm also losing daylight, so I'm gonna finish this tomorrow. This morning, we're gonna do a little bit of geometry. I needed to find a way to section this round table into 3 equal pie slices. So I'm gonna include a link in the description on how to do that. This was the funnest part of the project for me. I had never done this before, so it was kind of fun to figure out. I had made an attempt off camera before filming it to make sure I kind of had it figured out. Once my layout was done, I just labeled my 3 sections as A, B, and C. And you'll see that my straight line can be used as a starting point for my legs, and the other 2 are going to be lined up on the circle, which I was quite happy. I didn't realize how easy it was going to be actually. But in any event, I'm gonna mark all of my 3 holes for all my 3 legs. Which is going to obviously tell me where I'm going to put my threaded inserts. For the holes, I'm going to use one of those portable drill press stand things. The goal here was to use some tape to mark my bit for the depth, and then I'm like, what the f am I doing here? Take the tape off, remeasure it, put the tape on the correct side of the bit, and then finally stick it into the press. I made sure that before I drilled my holes, I put little pilot holes into all of my marks just to make sure my bit knew where to go. Hex bolts are going to go into those threaded inserts, so there's not really much room for error here. So I just wanted to make sure. And then here you can see I'm setting my depth stop based on where I marked my tape. That way I can't accidentally drill through my table. Once that was done, I got rid of all my layout lines because I didn't need them anymore. It might also be noteworthy, at this point in the project, the table is sanded to 120, so right there I'm using 120 grit. It was now time to take care of that little hole I made in the center of the table at the beginning of the project. I grabbed a maple splinter, a little bit of wood glue, and I just hammered it in, and then I kind of picked away at it with my fingers until it was kind of flush, and then I sanded it. I thought it might be important to point out that when you're sanding the side of a table like this, to make sure to stay very straight and to use a higher number grit. So I was using 180 grit there. I don't know if I trust myself to use any less. And then the edges to just do them by hand. And after that, I decided to sand the entire project top to bottom at 220 grit. So we're now on the home stretch. We're going to start to apply our poly finish. This will have to be applied 3 times. It has to dry about 2 hours between each coat. So you're going to apply it once, you're going to sand it very quickly with 320 grit and reapply that and do it 2 more times. You can kind of figure out how you want to go about doing this, whatever way you think works for you. In my opinion, this stuff is sort of kind of dry to the touch after a few minutes, so it's up to you whatever way you want to figure it out. So here's me sanding in between as I was talking about, and you can see it really is a really fast pass. I didn't want to remove the poly between each coat, I just wanted to kind of smoothen it out. So after that was done, it was time to apply an organic white hard wax oil, and I used a buffer pad to kind of rub it in, and I was really happy how it turned out. I'm not sure that I did this in the right order. As you can see, I haven't put the threaded inserts yet. You'll see in a second I'm using glue to put into the holes, which then I added the threaded inserts after, but it kind of screwed with my finish a little bit. I don't know that I would have done this in the same order if I had to do it all over again, so just something to keep in mind. So right about here I'm kind of making one of those faces like, oh, please don't ruin it, but I think it worked out okay. So everything in that step worked out pretty well. I have found in the past that finding the correct size of pilot hole for your threaded inserts is more important when you're working with hardwood than it is when you're working with softwood. So all that was left here was just to insert all of my hex bolts with any washer that fit. And if you made it this far into the video, thanks for watching. If you're interested in having one of these custom cables made for you, you can always find my contact information in the description of the video. And I can also have the threaded inserts placed in a manner that's compatible with some of the hairpin legs that are available on Amazon in order to keep the shipping cost down. So let me know.